Hi there, and welcome to Pastors on Porn, the podcast that's all about giving pastors a safe place to deal with some of their issues, find a safe place and a person to talk to, and get some hope and healing along the way. And today, if you hear some banging behind me, there's some construction going on, but I can't do much about that. They're putting a whole subdivision behind us, so there we go. But today I want to do something a little bit different. I have been asked to speak at a Young Life camp this coming week to a group of pastors. And the whole topic of the weekend is around the word resilience. And they asked me to come and speak and share a bit of my story. I guess maybe being in pastoral ministry for 28 years and about 25 of those or 24 of those were have been and continue to be as a lead pastor. I guess they figured that maybe there's something of resilience or stubbornness or something that I have to say. And so I want to just say on this whole topic, it obviously has a big bearing on the whole area of our inner struggles and what keeps us in ministry or what can spin us out of ministry, so to speak. So I'm going to do this in two parts because it's probably 45 minutes. So we'll break about halfway through. And I just think that gives a chance so it doesn't get too long in one setting. So let's talk a little bit about this word resilience and pastoral resilience. I looked up the definition, and these are some examples of what I saw. It said, resilience is toughness, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. And then it said, what does it mean to have resilience? It said, resilience means knowing how to cope in spite of setbacks or barriers or limited resources. It has to do with your emotional strength. Finally, the importance of resilience. Resilience is our ability to adapt or bounce back when things don't go as planned. Resilient people don't wallow or dwell on failures. They acknowledge the situation, learn from their mistakes, and move forward. I'm actually glad we're using and talking about the word resilience rather than what often is talked about at these kind of pastoral get-togethers is the word longevity. And I think the word resilience is way more of a robust word than longevity. It's more muscular. Why is because the whole idea of resilience requires a sense of resistance training. And this whole idea of resilience is obviously something that's going around and people are talking about in pastoral circles. They're also talking about this in educational circles. My wife has gone back to teach back in elementary school. She's a special ed teacher and an elementary school teacher. And she's taken, for a dozen years, she worked with me on staff. And just in this last year, she's gone back and has been teaching in all different schools as a TOC around the district. And it's been interesting talking to her, and I asked her, what feels different today than did, in the classroom today than maybe 10 to 15 years ago. And one of the things that she has said, and has been confirmed by other teachers as well who've taught for a long time, is the more fragile state of kids' emotional resilience. I mean, you kind of expect a grade 1 or kindergarten kid to be on the ground, thrashing and screaming and throwing fits, but she's had grade 4 and 5 students doing the same thing. I mean, something she's never saw before. In fact, some of the schools that she's going into right now, they do what's called resiliency classes, where they cycle kids through to try to help these kids deal with obstacles and challenges in the way they deal with them. And so I asked her, well, what are they teaching these classes? She says, well, I haven't been through the whole classes, but one thing, they talk about is big problems, big reactions. You hold your hands really wide, little problems, little reactions, and trying to make sure that not every little problem has a big reaction. And there's some kids that anything throws them off. And so it's interesting how this word resilience is really going through the school system. So I don't know if any of you have been throwing a fit, screaming on the ground and thrashing around recently, but I think the word resiliency does have some real meaning for us in what we do for our jobs and vocations. So I'm just going to give maybe 4 or 5 ideas that came to my mind and how have played into my own wrestling with this issue. And here's the first one. Isolation is the number one enemy of resilience. I wanted to start with this important one. And, as they always say, if you remember only one thing in this talk, I hope this is the one that sticks with you. Isolation is the number one enemy of resilience. Proverbs 17:17 says this, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. One guy, podcast guy I've been listening to, speaks a lot about leadership, is Bill Thrall. And in his book, Ascent of a Leader, and I heard him quote this on a podcast, he says this, the number one reason for leadership failure is isolation. All of the other reasons don't even come close. Recently, I heard John Ortberg on a Carey Nieuwhof podcast say this. The number one predictor of whether someone's leadership is sustainable is this. Do they have a fully disclosing friend? A person to whom they can share all of their secrets, their struggles, and their temptations. I mean, obviously, you can see how absolutely crucial this is if you're struggling with a secret addiction or an unwanted behavior, or feel that your life is losing some core equilibrium. And I think there's a difference between sort of transparency, or what often passes as transparency, and true vulnerability. Sometimes I'll talk to people or listen to pastors, and there's this veneer of transparency, and people go, oh, they're so transparent. But you don't really sense that they're being vulnerable. I've had a couple pastor friends of mine recently who've fallen in spectacular ways, really damaging, horrible ways in their ministries due to sexual acting out behaviors. And, I've always wrestled, and I haven't been able to talk to either one of these guys because they've gone deep underground. But here was the question. Was there ever really a person who knew what they were going through and what they were struggling with? Was there a trusted friend? Somebody, to quote John Ortberg, that says a fully disclosing friend? Or was there only a selective sharing, just putting half your best foot forward? I think true resilience requires a deep connectiveness at the deepest and most vulnerable level of our lives. And I just think that is probably, the number one and most important thing in this whole conversation. And let me just say, we need to take responsibility for our own connections. In our movement, sometimes I listen to pastors whine that go, why doesn't our movement support us more? Maybe in your denomination, pastors whine too, but they certainly do in ours. And I've heard a lot of whining over the years. Why aren't we more connected? Why aren't we more supported? And you know what? Take responsibility for your own connections. Call somebody up and say, let's do coffee. Let's do lunch. I'm buying. We can be so isolated within our communities, within our leadership teams. Zoom calls that I do with a number of people now when I do mentoring. You can do Zoom calls, 2, 3, 4 people. They're amazing. They're kind of the new Skype. And I think connection is easier than ever before, but something that we resist, and we just have to take responsibility for it. Now, obviously, there's safe people, safe environments for us to process things with. Maybe you start with a counselor, somebody that's got, the whole thing where they have to keep secrets. And then you go from there. I really do think, though, that is the number one thing around resilience, and those Bill Thrall and John Ortberg would certainly concur with that. In my journey, as I've shared, 27, 8 years of ministry, I've certainly been through a lot of seasons and a lot of storms in my life. Perhaps the most challenging season that I've gone through is what I call my perfect storm. I don't know if you remember that movie, The Perfect Storm. I think George Clooney was in it, who happens to be exactly my age. I think his birthday is very close to mine. I mean, a lot of people confuse me with George Clooney who meet me, and I get that. But it was a great movie, and George Clooney in that movie, he was out on a fishing boat, and there was kind of a once-in-a-100-year convergence of 3 storms that descended on their fishing boat in the northeast of the U.S., and I think it was a bad ending, if I remember correctly. But I was in a similar situation when I was in my ministry boat and entered into my 40s. I had been pastoring from the time I was about 29, and I entered in my 40s, and 3, I call them storm systems, converged in my life. I've spoken about it in some other places. One of them was a midlife crisis. Just looking back and feeling the complete futility of the work of my hands and what I had been laboring at in my ministry. What was it all worthwhile? I felt like a complete failure, a complete bust. And I also realized later that it was the time when my dad had left my mom, had gone through his whole midlife crisis as well. And so that was right around turning 40. Also, a second storm system was this whole burnout that I went through. When we planted the church, for 7 years, I was a TOC, teacher on call, and was teaching 3-4 times a week in the middle of writing sermons and leading a church and trying to plant a church. And after about 6 and 7 years into it, completely hit a wall. And then the third storm system was being alone, being isolated, being in an office with high-speed internet and my computer, unfiltered computers, and the advent, 2004, 2005, of high-speed internet and realizing I could download movies, high-definition porn movies, and it was just like I was completely losing it. And I just felt like, you know what, I got to get out of ministry. This is not working for me. The crazy thing is, as I've shared before, I did not feel that I had the permission to leave, but I had to work through it the hard way by ruthlessly reaching out to counselors and other pastors and other people to try to regain, with God's grace, a sense of equilibrium in my life, which, thanks be to God, that did come after 3-4 years of wrestling through some of my issues. And those are some of the things we talk about in this podcast. But you know what? It all came out of connectedness. I know that if I had really leaned into a double life and I had gone underground, still playing the role, still doing my stuff, that my story could have veered off into one of those far more tragic stories where I'm making the newspaper. And so, you know what? It's God's grace. It's something in me that enabled me to come through that season and hopefully be a source of hope for other people as well. So, I don't know about you, but one of the wines that I have in our denomination, you might have them in yours, is I rarely come in contact with older seasoned pastors who are willing or were willing at that time to give me hope and encouragement. It's like once they left pastoring, they wanted nothing to do with it and completely, they were gone. You couldn't find anybody who had been a seasoned long-term pastor. Maybe it's a little different in your denomination, but I was looking for someone to champion me and help me and walk through that. And so I really want to be a part in our movement, in our denomination, and I hope you are as well, of helping the next generation, where I can sit down with them and champion them and encourage them, not to tell them to do it like I did it or they have to follow what I think is the right way to do it, but really walk out the way and the mode that God has called them to pastor. So that really is part of my hope for the next generation, that I could be a different example as an older seasoned pastor to come alongside and say, you know what, even in these storms and seasons, there is hope. I know you're going through a wobbly time right now, a time where you feel like you're being shaken at every level. But with God's help and the support of other men, we can get through this and you can come out stronger on the other side. So that's just the first thing. You have to resist isolation at every level, because if you have isolation, you are open prey to the enemy, and you will go underground, and you will find yourself drifting more and more and more. Here's the second thing that I would say that is absolutely crucial for resilience: to fix your focus and know your call. I put those together. The whole idea of resilience, the very definition, assumes that you will face tough times. Remember that whole idea of resistance training? If you have my son is a weightlifter, has got twice the size the arms that I do. And he's got these amazing weight machines that he goes on. And it's just resistance training. That's how you become more muscular in your faith. And, I would just say, when it comes to the tests and trials of being a pastor, I don't know of any area where we're tested or struggle more than in the relational dimension of our life. Our church, local church, has been going on for 25 years with me and my wife providing the lead role. And this is just the honest truth, folks. We literally have had hundreds of people who've come to our church and left. Some were never close to us. Some were very close to us. Some left on great terms, some on okay terms, some on horrible terms. I literally have had people cross the street, look away from me when they've seen me coming. I've become some people's enemy, some people that I literally gave of myself to help and serve them. That is brutal as a pastor. I sometimes like to say that, the phrase that God wrote on the wall to Nebuchadnezzar that so freaked him out. I think it was Meeny, Meeny, Tekel Parsons, and it was, "You have been weighed in my balance and found wanting." How many times in my ministry, over and over again, people have essentially said, "I have weighed you in my balance and found wanting." That is brutal as a pastor. People feel called to other churches. You ever had this happen? People feel called to other churches. You ask them for the reason, and they go to a church that has even less of that than you have and your church has. It doesn't even reflect the reasons. They don't even know why they're leaving. Or the reasons they give aren't the real reasons. We share a parking lot in our town with a large growing church that's growing by leaps and bounds, and many people head to this church. We share the same parking lot. How do you navigate? How do you have resilience in that season of ministry? I talked to a couple of pastors recently, and they were the most depressing conversations that I'd had in a long time. Those kind of conversations where the pastors are essentially saying, "You know what, in ministry, let me tell you, no good deed goes unpunished." One pastor told me, "I really think that me and my family, we're the only ones following God in our church." I thought, really? It was, it sounded to me a little bit like when Elijah said, "I am the only one, the only prophet left, the only person who still loves you." Another pastor that same week said, and he was leaving the ministry, "Invariably the ones we love and help the most are the ones who leave us the quickest and at the slightest provocation." He says, "I'm tired of it." That is, how do you have resilience in this thing that we call modern day pastoral ministry? Been reading a book, Carey Nieuwhof's book, Didn't See It Coming, and he says cynicism is one of the biggest occupational hazards that we deal with. Cynicism begins not because you don't care, but because you do care. It starts because you poured your heart into something and got little in return. Most cynics are former optimists. As much as you may not want to admit it, cynicism is a choice. Life doesn't make you cynical. You make you cynical. Once a cynic doesn't always mean a cynic. Not if you get Jesus involved. And I think without getting Jesus involved in this, it is almost impossible to be and show and display a degree of resilience along the way. Let me tell you a little bit of how Jesus got involved in this struggle with me. And this was a number of years ago. that I felt like Jesus kind of hit me between the eyes with a phrase and a passage out of John 21. And if I hadn't had this, I don't think I'd still be in ministry. And this is what has helped me properly orient myself to this crazy relational dynamic, people coming, people going, people calling you blessed, people not calling you blessed. How do you maintain that with a degree of resiliency and not just becoming the ultimate cynic? Well, here's what God showed me in John 21. And it's the whole story of Jesus talking to Peter after he had betrayed him. And this is what Jesus says. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said, "you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." Well, I don't want to go into a place where people are constantly giving me thumbs up and thumbs down and constantly coming and constantly going. God has put me in all sorts of places where I don't want to go as a pastoral leader. So how do you navigate that? How do you display a degree of resilience through that? Well, here's what I believe the Lord showed me. This was never really at its core about people and my on again, off again desire to help people. This is what it's about. Jesus asks each one of us, do you love me? Do you love me more than these? Who are these? Hurting, hostile, angry, sometimes good, sometimes bad people, sheep, biting sheep. Do you love me more than the ones who will betray you? Do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Take care of my lambs. It's not about the people. It's about your love and your obedience and your worship to me. That's what it's always been about. If you think it's about people, you will go crazy. But if you believe it's about loving, serving, and following Jesus, then you will have, I believe, the inner fortitude, the inner navigation towards Jesus. And every time someone leaves or somebody comes, it's not your self-esteem or your encouragement or discouragement doesn't rise and fall. It's like, Jesus, I'm doing this for you. So that's been absolutely core for me. Without that, I think I would have left a long time ago. Read a book a little while ago on servant leadership, and it was this is what the fellow said. He said, we become jaded when people treat us like servants. And he says, it goes with the job, folks. It's the shepherd's job to give more than they get in return. And I think we will always be giving more than we're getting in return if we're just looking at our ministries at a horizontal level. And so Jesus continues to lead me into places I don't want to go. He continues to have me in relationships with people I don't want to be in relationship with. And, you realize people are amazing. People are fickle. People reward me. People resist me. People rise and call me blessed, and people cross the street when they see me coming. Yet in all of it, Jesus says to me, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. I think that's really the core of hopefully why we're doing what we do. And so those are the first two things I wanted to start with today. When it comes to resilience, number one is resist isolation at every point, at every level. And then the second thing is properly orient yourself, your call, your life, your focus towards Jesus in terms of what he's called you to do. We'll go on to a couple more in the next podcast. But let me just say, I really do want to connect with people. And you're a pastor and you're feeling like you need a safe, secure place to talk to. You're going through stuff and maybe your board is not the place to start with, or you're in a situation where you go, I feel like a top that's becoming totally wobbly right now, and you want to reach out to somebody. I'd love to hear from you. My email is bandofbrothers@shaw.ca. And you can also go on the website, which is bandofbrothers.care. So I'd love to connect more with you. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next podcast when we talk a little bit more about resilience.